back to my channel. Today we're going to be making some biscuits, and they're not any ordinary biscuit. They're going to be some scallion thyme pepper biscuits. What we're learning today is the biscuit method, which is used in making biscuits and scones. And basically the biscuit method is when you add your cold butter to your dry ingredients and you cut it in, as they call it. Basically what this is doing is forming layers. And the way that this happens is because the butter will interfere with the gluten formation. So it'll basically break up the gluten. And it does this because it'll be a layer of butter and then a layer of gluten. So basically when I say gluten, I'm talking about the flour mixed with the liquid ingredient. So it breaks it up so that it doesn't all become one dough. And when the biscuits are in the oven, the butter layers melt in the heat, and this leaves an air pocket behind. And this air pocket is where the baking powder can rise and release the gases. So that's how the butter helps make flaky biscuits. So for this recipe, we're using 2 tablespoons of fresh thyme, and then we're using half a cup of scallions. So I'm going to wash these, and then I'm going to finely chop the thyme and just chop the scallions. So now that our thyme and our scallions are all chopped up, you could add it to a small bowl. You could add them together. See, we're going for this size. My eyes are still watering from those scallions. And now we're going to be doing our dry ingredients. And you just need one big bowl for this whole recipe. You're going to mix it all in the same bowl. And we're starting with 260 grams of all-purpose flour, or 2 cups of flour. Next, we're adding 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of kosher salt, and half a teaspoon of black pepper. So now we're going to whisk the dries together, just like that. And then, because as I explained in the biscuit method, you add the butter to the flour and then you cut it in, we're going to add the butter next. And it's 113 grams, or half a cup, or 1 stick. There's a few methods to cut butter in. You can do it by hand, which you would cut this up into little cubes, and then you would use either your palms, kind of like pushing it into the flour, or your thumbs, also squeezing the butter. You can use a fork, kind of mashing it. You can even put it onto a KitchenAid mixer with the paddle attachment. You could put it in a food processor with the blade. And that's one way that I would recommend. If you have a food processor, definitely do it that way. The only thing is that it does break up the butter into really small pieces. So it's not going to be super, super flaky, but it's going to get the job done. And my favorite way, which I've actually found online a couple years ago, is grating the butter on a cheese grater. And this is really awesome because what it does is it leaves behind long pieces of butter. And in the biscuits, this is wonderful because it makes them almost pull apart. They're so flaky because the butter is extra, extra long. So I recommend trying this way if you've never tried it before. Also, I think this is easier to clean up than a food processor and not as intense as using your hands. These pieces of butter it looks kind of like shredded mozzarella cheese, but these are so long, and this is wonderful for biscuits. So this is what it's gonna look like. It looks like shredded cheese. We're just gonna kind of mix it with the flour, coat it pretty evenly. And sometimes it sticks together, like this is a pretty big chunk, so you want to break it up a little bit, but you're not going to really melt the butter because you grated it so quickly. It's such a quick process. So you'll still have those wonderful layers. That's it. A couple seconds of mixing, that's what you're going for. Now we're adding in the scallions and the thyme that we chopped up before. Anytime you're making scones or biscuits and there's an add-in, you always add it between cutting the butter in and adding the liquid, because that way it mixes together more evenly. And as I'll go over in a couple minutes, when you add the liquid, you don't want to form too much gluten, and if you add it in after it's already mixed, you're forming too much gluten. And the liquid we're using today is water. You can substitute milk if you prefer the flavor of milk, but in biscuits, you can't really tell the difference because all the fat's coming from the butter anyway. So it's 187 grams of water, or 3/4 of a cup plus 1 tablespoon. And you want to make sure that your water is cold, because if it's warm, it's going to start to kind of melt that butter, and then you won't have those layers. So now is the fun part. We gotta mix it. And I usually start out with the spatula, but this is gonna get pretty messy, so it's okay if it goes everywhere and you're making kind of a mess. Alright, so we're gonna mix this with the spatula until it's basically like a shaggy dough. So now I'm gonna put it onto the table. I'm just gonna put a little bit of flour down just so it doesn't stick. And then I am putting this onto the flour. So now the shaggy mess of dough is on my table, and what I'm going to do is push it down and just fold it over. And this way you're not overworking the dough. And what that means is that when the water's added and you mix the flour with the water, you're forming gluten. And just like the cookies when I talked about in that video, you don't want to mix it for too long after it's combined. Same thing here. You just want it to basically come together, because you don't want those gluten strands to form, and you don't want to overwork it to the point where you're melting the butter and there's no longer the beautiful layers. So if you have a bench scraper, you could use that, or just a regular knife. You could use the same one you used to cut the scallions and thyme up with. And I think one more fold. So this is kind of a wet biscuit, which I like. There are different types of biscuits. If you look up, there's like drop biscuits, which are basically liquid and you literally drop them. Perfect. Now I'm just going to push this down until it's about 1 inch thick. I'd say we're there. So now to cut the biscuits, you could use a biscuit cutter or a cookie cutter, or you could just use the rim of a glass. And I like to kind of get a little bit of flour on it and then just press it. And there's a biscuit. You can make them any size you want, any thickness you want. It's really up to you. You could add cheese. You could omit one of the add-ins. This is also a really good recipe if you just want plain biscuits. Just do not add the scallions, pepper, or thyme. So this recipe makes 4 biscuits. 4 pretty large biscuits, honestly. These are huge, but I love me some biscuits. And the last one you can kind of just push together to form a rough biscuit shape. I mean, I'm not serving these at a 3 Michelin star restaurant. You know, I'm kind of stuck at home in self-isolation right now, so I think Joe and I will probably just eat these for dinner tonight. So these I'm going to transfer to a sheet tray lined with parchment paper. Yeah, this biscuit is massive. That's going to take a while to bake. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put an egg wash on these, and what the egg wash does is it makes it a nice brown color and it makes it really shiny. And then I'm going to sprinkle salt and pepper on top of the egg wash. To make an egg wash, you want to combine 1 egg with a little bit of water, and then you're going to mix it up with a fork and then brush it on top. So now that you have your egg wash, you're going to brush it on top of the biscuits. And you want to do a light coating, or else you're going to have like scrambled eggs. You don't want that. Now I'm just going to sprinkle some salt and pepper on top. So now I'm going to put these into a 425-degree oven for about 15 minutes. but as you can see, mine are pretty large, so this is probably going to take 20 to 25 minutes to bake. So just keep an eye on it, and you'll know when they're done because they'll puff up and they'll be nice golden brown on top and layery and buttery and just so good. I love biscuits, so I'm going to bake these now. Thank you so much for tuning in and learning how to make some biscuits today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe and please like it. And I will be linking the recipe below onto my food blog, so you can read that over if you like to. So I hope everybody stays safe and healthy. Have a great day. Bye.